Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. Today, I'm joined by Simon Burton, an absolute powerhouse of award ceremonies and events based out of London, UK. You may have seen his talk recently at Confex discussing punk business for events, or maybe you've read his book, The Event Professional's Handbook, Access All Areas. I'm really excited to be speaking with Simon today. Welcome, Simon.
Well, thank you for having me, Matthew.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you get your start and get to where you are today? Can you take me a little bit through your career?
Yeah, of course. I took what I regard as the only acceptable route into events, which was I fell into them and then immediately fell in love with them. I'd been working in consumer magazines. I found myself in a trade show business and I just loved community. We didn't call it that then, but I loved what we now call community. And I loved the buzz. And as a communication guy, I loved this journey up the incline towards the event and then the fall off that's gradual rather than sudden. And so my career in trade shows then led me to launching my own PR business, which helped try to work on that with both organizers and with exhibitors. I became obsessed with this idea of extending the event horizon and really telling stories through events. And then a series of chance meetings led me to launch with some great business partners my first set of awards, the Football Business Awards. And I immediately discovered that awards did two things that I really liked. They created brilliant stories, this ability to amplify and connect and share beyond the timed elimination of the event itself. But they also created uplift emotion. They were by their nature celebratory. And that was just a fantastic place to find myself. And so the latter part of my career has mostly been with awards, frequently playing with format and model and working my way around what we can do to really maximize that storytelling.
Yeah, excellent. And so you mentioned that sort of led to this career in awards. So what makes an award campaign successful and impactful? And can you share an insight from a particularly successful award campaign you've organized?
What I'd say is, and this is true of all the awards campaign I've organized, is that they have very clear and somewhat obvious to event professionals, very clear chapters. So we're going to appoint our judges, and our judges are highly networked, highly influential in the market, and they allow us to start reaching corners of the community we might not have been in before. And then the entries come in and we announce a shortlist. And so we have this other celebratory moment. It's very clearly signposted. We understand the language of it, even if we've not worked on this particular awards campaign previously. And then, of course, the judges review them. And then we get to the ceremony and there's this big outpouring of excitement. I mean, I wish you could get that kind of excitement at a trade show, that kind of, or a conference, that kind of, I want to be there. I want to see everybody and connect and celebrate my success. And then coming out of that, of course, we have case studies, we have media coverage of the winners. Putting the word winner on anything immediately creates amplification. And I often say to people that awards are like sporting events. So they're like the road to the Super Bowl or like World Cup or the Olympics. And we understand there are stages through this. Then they feel like they're doing something very culturally fundamental to us.
And so how do you weave that storytelling into your events to capture the audience's attention and create memorable experiences?
Well, I guess I'd look at that in two parts. How do I do it beforehand? And that's always somewhat the punk in me. Break the rules slightly. Appoint a judge that nobody expected. Come up with a new category, which is really disruptive. Show that you're not stagnant. And then when you get to the event itself, you have to remember that what's normal and everyday for us as event professionals is a once a year moment for our attendees. So our attendees can become very staid in their behavior and they're also nervous. Really easy to not signpost things properly. So I want everything we do around an awards event to be clearly signposted, not overly complex, to lots of housekeeping, lots of this is what's going to happen, but told in a fun and engaging way so that people aren't taken by surprise in a negative way.
Yeah. And so looking at award ceremonies in particular, what are the unique challenges that a planner has to consider in that planning? Like, there's the ceremony itself, catering, audiovisual. Would you say that the awards requires expert professionals to coordinate that event, or rather than an enthusiastic exhibition or meeting organizer?
I think if I could wave my magic wand and have anything happen to the event industry, it would be that everybody who works in trade shows or conferences has to work on an awards campaign and event at least once, because, and you will understand this as a production guy, awards are tightly scripted. They are much more like a TV show than they are an event where we're allowing serendipity to come to the fore. And that scripting creates event planning consequences. So every day you are closer to the event happening, changing something has ramifications for more people. And those consequences are more keenly felt. You have to tell more people you've changed the script. You can't just change the script in a Word document, because there are probably 12 different people who are making this event happen who need to know that script has changed. And it needs to be presented seamlessly, because people's expectations are that nothing's going to go wrong on stage. So that would be my broad brushstrokes. And then when you start to drill down, we recently ran the Smiley Charity Film Awards, one of my projects that we have sold but continue to help out on the management of. And I took some of the client team backstage, and they realized there were 12 people backstage making that awards happen. And that every time we changed a script, or a sponsor changed their logo, or something else like that changed, that had ramifications throughout the event that all of those 12 people needs to be aware of. That 2-hour event had 900 cues for sound, for lighting, for video assets, for PowerPoint assets. I don't think we ever think of a trade show or a conference at that level of granularity. And I think it would do us all good to recognize that could be possible.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. My background being in theater, I'm used to 900 cue shows, and then moving into the sort of meetings and events world, where on outside we may have 10 cues in an entire afternoon program. I do believe that you're right, that event professionals, one award show a year just to get that granularity that you're talking about can greatly inform that muscle that they build in planning and communication.
Well, I remember the first time we told a client that we needed to engage a show caller, and they were like, "What the hell's a show caller? Don't you do that?" And you try to explain it, and it sort of doesn't make sense unless it's in your blood. And now that client would always not only want to know who the show caller was, but would want to be involved in the briefing process and understands it intimately. And now is starting to get some of the nuance between a show caller and an event producer, and why that might look different, and why we need a stage manager. So the actual background plays into that, absolutely.
Yeah. And so how do you use technology to make events more engaging for attendees at award ceremonies? Is there anything that you think is changing in the way that we experience events because of particular pieces of technology?
That's an interesting question. I used to be a real kind of two-screen guy, and we had to do everything we could to get the attendee onto the social media. And I still believe we need to facilitate that. And we need to make it easy for them to arrive and check in and know where they're sitting. If you're used to it in a sports or cinema or theatrical environment, it's the least you can expect in an event where you're paying 10 times that to attend. So those kind of things. But actually, I'm starting to think something of a change, and I actually want to create such compelling content on the stage that the audience doesn't feel the need to be distracted.
That's really interesting, because there seems to be a cultural pushback. And I was listening to a great podcast with Simon Sinek about social media and devices for children. And they were talking about a generation that grew up on those devices. And it immediately made me think of how many events, certainly pre-pandemic, I would go to where or participate in the planning, where the planner would say, but how do we get the hashtag? How do we get them to engage with us while they're sitting in their seat? And there seems to be another sort of reversal of that, where, as you just said, I want to make the content so compelling that they're not on their devices anymore.
Or at least they focus on the content, which is, after all, why they're there. Yeah. We worked with two really phenomenal, very simple pieces of technology recently that I think are indicative of how the landscape's going to change. So one of them is called Get Picker. And essentially it uses AI facial recognition to find your picture at the event. So all of the pictures can be uploaded, and then you simply log in, take your picture, and it will find you for you to share. My teams and I used to do that manually. We'd know you'd attended our event, we'd see the picture of you, we'd send it to you to share. Now that's automated, and that's about your experience, not us imposing the hashtag on you. And the other bit of tech we work with is called Shout Out Social. And it's one of those ones which your immediate reaction is it's not going to be high enough quality. Essentially, it is an app on a smartphone with a microphone and a gimbal. And you can now interview as many attendees as you can get around with this kit. So it's very mobile. It's not like a camera. It's very, very user-generated content. And you ask them what they think of the event, and whether they're having a great time, or what their standout moment was. And when they finish, they type in their email, and within seconds, they are delivered that video of themselves with the bumpers, with lower thirds and bumpers.
That's amazing. I'm going to have to hit you up after this.
And what we've seen is that has revolutionized not just the way we captured content at the event, but the way in which we empowered our attendees to share that content. It was theirs.
That's fantastic. Great idea. I'm going to steal that 100%. So how have audience expectations changed in the recent years, and how are you meeting those new demands in your events? And if you have a specific example.
I think audiences have ceased to see a divide between content they consume in their personal life and content they consume in their professional life. So they might understand that something's a homemade video on YouTube or on TikTok or whatever. But when they're adopting their professional guise and their professional skin, they don't suddenly think this isn't Game of Thrones. They think this is Game of Thrones for business. I think that's where the big tech companies, the Salesforces, the Adobes, and so on, have really recognized that their content needs to be at that level. I think it's very hard to get away with something that's okay, at whatever level, whether that's the comfort of the seat or the quality of the coffee. People expect the experience that they'd get. Why should their event experience be worse than everything else in their lives?
Yeah, 100%. I also think it puts a lot of pressure on event professionals to, as you said, create the Game of Thrones of their event, right? And that there's a long journey from where they may be right now to getting there, and that becomes a little bit scary to them. And so, do you have any specific advice on how you can, like, if you're an event organizer or a professional who's listening to this episode, and they say, "Oh, I got to turn my stoneworking conference into the Game of Thrones of stoneworking conferences," where do you begin?
Oh, well, the first thing is you begin at the beginning. You go slowly. I mean, you and I, and this event professional we're talking about, are used to talking to someone who thinks that we are going to create the last Super Bowl with ads and the journey there and all the fans and the tailgate party and social media. Can't we create the first Super Bowl first? Well, there was at one point a first Super Bowl. You need to be able to create the first one before you can get to the last one. So that's the first thing. It's going to be a journey. That would be my first. So don't beat yourself up. And the second thing is I pinched some advice from Pine and Gilmore in the experience economy. I heard at a convention years ago, and we try to say it all the time. Pick a 3-word theme. Not a 4-word, not a 2-word. Pick a 3-word theme and try to make everything you create around that event reflect the 3-word theme. And I think as you do that, you'll find it's easier to start polishing what you create.
Yeah. So the example I was going to give, the Super Bowl is a great example because I used to work for a company that produced the halftime show. And by the time I was working for that company, of course, it was like this mega thing. I think it was the Justin Timberlake year or something like that. And it was massive and moving stages and lights and pyrotechnics. And I was doing some research and I found the first televised halftime show that the NFL ever did. And I swear to God, it's papier mâché, really creepy looking clowns and like facades of castles that were being pushed by volunteers on the stage or on the field. And so, that idea of like, don't try to produce the current Super Bowl, do the first one, and then
polish one thing really highly rather than trying to get everything perfect at once because you'll fail because it's just too difficult. But I don't know, work really hard on the deck. Work really hard on having at least your speaker interviews are filmed in high def or what. Make sure. I think a lot of conference content suffers because people who aren't really good panel hosts are asked because they're sponsors or someone's uncle or whatever it might be to host the panel. Make sure your panel hosts and your keynotes, make sure they're really good.
And so how does social media enhance that live events experience for your audiences? And, is there a particular strategy that you're starting to implement?
Oh, yeah. Hashtag everywhere, right? To contradict what we said earlier, make sure hashtag earlier. I think the secret sauce is not in telling people to tweet, X, Insta post, or whatever. It's in giving them things that they want to post about. So one of my biggest learnings from awards, and this is just like it's so simple. And when you tell someone who's not seen it, they don't believe you, which is we put step and repeat walls everywhere, because you know what? People know what to do when they see a step and repeat walls. They go, that's one of those logo walls at the Oscars. I'm going to stand in front of this and take my picture. And of course, the brand and all the sponsors get this content shared. So the first thing is step and repeat walls everywhere and let people user generate it. Can't tell you how many times I've offered to help and people don't want that. They want to do theirs. They want to own that moment. So have people around who can help, but don't intrude. And the second thing is it's about how you manage social media. Absolutely. Always endorse what your audience does. So if your audience posts, thank them, like, comment, engage, give them that dopamine hit of reward.
Excellent. So just moving on to sustainability and social responsibility, how are you incorporating that into your events, and what's been the audience response to those practices?
Well, obviously, you can imagine an event like Charity Film Awards. Those kind of principles are really important. We had every one of the graphics is now from recycled material and is recyclable, and the inks are completely water soluble, and there's no environmental damage. And then the carpet was recycled and recycled. But actually, as I said on stage, even my jokes were recycled this year. But don't be afraid. I mean, there are some things like we have a digital program, but people actually like the physical program. And so here in the UK, we have the Forestry Stewardship Council, which means the paper is sustainably sourced. We do have those things. We had locally sourced food and beverages. I think you can do those things and show people you care. And actually, if you're not too strict about it, they will come with you, because they expect that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, getting into some metrics and analytics, like what analytics are you using in your planning and evaluating the success of an event when you produce them?
I'm really, really old school on this. The first thing I care about is, did the audience like it? Because if you'd come to Charity Film Awards with me, you're an event professional, you would have been moved by the content, but you'd spot that gap over there and you'd wonder why we did that a bit like that. And that's wonderful, but you weren't my audience. I want to know that we have three audiences. For most events, you're going to have multiple audiences. So work out what the reaction is you want from each of those. So is there a major potential sponsor who tells you this was fantastic? Right, for me, that's a tick. This is someone who had no vested interest in liking it. Right? If they like it, they're going to have to spend to be part of it. So they don't want to like it, but they understand the market. They understand the community. That's a big tick. Then second tick would be existing sponsors and partners tell you that it was great. And you sort of want to hear the words better than last year, even if you know it wasn't, even if you know it was exactly the same. You want them to feel it was better than last year. And then the third is the rank and file attendee. And that for me is the most heartwarming. It's when those people seek us out or email us afterwards and tell us how great the experience was for them. After that, all the other metrics are client or sponsor driven. Did we get the number of views we wanted on streaming platforms? What was their social media activity like? But in terms of that, did the event work? Did it touch people? I want that audience there telling me it did.
Yeah, absolutely. So just want to go back to the idea of the storytelling that we touched on earlier. So what kind of strategies are you using to keep the audience engaged before, during, and after the event? And how are you laying storytelling into that strategy?
We tell them a lot what's going to happen next. I mean, that's sometimes hard with events because the campaign's unfolding and it might not suit you to announce your keynote speaker next week. But making the audience feel like it's participating, or at least it's signposted. It's not, don't take them by surprise. If you can help it, really, really difficult. That would be the first thing I do. Most of the awards that I now work on have kind of storytelling innately in them at those stages we discussed earlier, but then give them the tools to signpost it. So give them little social tiles that allow them to share they've entered. Right? People like to share they've entered. We use Ingo all the time for our judges to socially share that they're judges. Hugely important part of our campaign. So those things. And then when you get to the event, I think a lot of us, particularly on an awards or a conference where it is probably scripted, tends to take last year's script and sort of polish it. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think you can forget that the audience sometimes didn't know what was going on and you needed to explain to them what was going on. So there are a few times where we will intervene in what looks like the smooth flow of the event in order to say, this is coming up later. It's like on TV. So now it's an ad break. Don't go away because when we come back, X will happen. We spend quite a lot of time telling people it's not over. And we do a really interesting thing on Charity Film Awards. We have 2 awards that anybody in the room could win, and they are not conditional on the category that they are entered in. And so they can't disengage before the end because they might win one of the last 2 awards.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And then, so what are you doing after the event to continue that story? And is that leading into the following year?
A little. I'll explain why. Lots of assets. Here's your winners animation. Here's your silver animation. In every format. Here's the one for LinkedIn. Here's the one for X. Here's the one for Facebook. Here's the one for Instagram. Make it really easy for them to have a little brand collateral pack of winners' assets. But we also make things physical. So obviously, the winners on the night get trophies. After the event, everybody gets a certificate. They get a certificate, and it's a digital certificate where they can print it out and put it on their wall. So keep that going, interview some of the winners, engage with them. But actually, to your final point, I don't think it hurts. I think it's a poor trend of modern business across the board to sort of hound your community constantly. I quite like letting them have their piece for a bit.
But only for a bit, right?
Only for a bit, right?
Yeah, I like that sense of sort of almost sort of poking the community bear. Like, are you sad? Like, not to be negative here, but are you sad you didn't win? Well, there's next year, and here's
right.
Like, use that winner asset to sort of motivate your community into sort of stepping up their game a little bit. To be, you weren't in the tie here. You need to step it up for next year and starting that story.
We would do different things on different campaigns. So on Charity Film Awards, for instance, there's a lot that's owned by an organization called Smiley Movement. They're very, very video centric. So lots of the winners would then be interviewed and have additional content made about why they won. But on a project like Football Business Awards, that might be case studies of the winning entries that have become a repository. I mean, obviously, Cannes Lion, one of the most successful awards campaigns in the world, it's that knowledge base which underwrites the whole program. World Sport Photography Awards, another of my projects, doesn't have a physical event. We're just celebrating the world's best sports photography and this media output. But we are about to produce a coffee table book of the world's best sports photography. All right, so, yeah, work out what that content should be for your market, for your community.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So hybrid events are presenting a unique challenge and opportunity. How are you navigating these changes to make seamless experiences for both in-person and viewer attendees or online attendees?
Honestly, it's still a stumble. I just think we're being asked to produce TV shows and high quality events at the same time, and I'm not sure it's possible actually to achieve perfection in both. I think there's compromise, and I think it is incredibly hard for the teams needing to deliver on that. So I think we've tried to navigate it by understanding that the technology side of the virtual, of the stream, is a skill set we didn't know. We might have thought we did, but we didn't understand. And so whilst we've learned, it behoves us to employ experts. Like, you need a translator. You can't just film it and stick it up and it'll be okay. And it will be okay across platforms. It's hard. It goes wrong. And working out what the what's ifs are. And for us as an organization, for my business, Exposure Communications, we were part of the Virtual Events Institute. We were right at the forefront of trying to grasp this. I still think it's really difficult. It's recognizing that perhaps for us on the stream, the virtual bit, we need to go a bit slower. Our instincts are only 4 years old. They're not 40 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, and it goes back to that progress, not perfection, sort of concept that you mentioned earlier, which is, as you adopt new things, as you try to make those changes, that it shouldn't be, from 0 to 5, like the Super Bowl, right? Do the first Super Bowl, not the current Super Bowl. And I think you're right that there is a certain element of the industry that is trying to say, well, it's either don't do it at all or do the Oscars presentation, which is essentially a hybrid event. It's a televised live event. And so nobody's quite seeing the progress in the middle. And so they're coming to it saying, well, overnight, I have to turn this into not televised at all into completely televised. And that's where they're stumbling.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, Charity Film Awards is fresh in my mind. It was only last week. So it's last week. We had 800 people in the room. And we had 250,000 people watching the stream. I don't know how that's reconcilable in terms of where you weight your effort or where you weight your compromise. And let me give you a really interesting example of why I think this has become challenging for so many of us. The model of Charity Film Awards is we show the winning films. Right? That's why it's in a cinema. That's why it's an amazing event, because the content is the winning films, and these films are short and impactful. So sometimes those films have completely legitimately got popular music songs in them. So 2 years ago, Born Free, the animal charity that works to free lions and elephants and so on around the world, had a film, and it had the song Born Free in it. That's fine in the live event. Guess what YouTube does when you show that on the stream?
Yeah, absolutely. They shut you down right away.
They shut you down. And when we had that content legitimately, it wasn't like Born Free knew we had the content. Born Free had a problem with it, even though they had the rights to it. So I think those little nuances can become, we're having to double think. The CEO wants to walk on to Back in Black by AC/DC, which is probably easily done with whatever the US equivalent of PRS is. But that ain't possible if you then stream it.
Yeah, well, you have to go behind, and we ran into this a lot during the pandemic, where, as you said, there would always be, some CEO who wanted to be sort of played on to the live stream with, some AC/DC song.
I mean, who wouldn't, right? Who wouldn't want to come to AC/DC? It's my life, but
yeah, for sure. But we would have to, there ends up being layers and layers of private viewership guarantees that you have to put in. And you're right. A lot of people stumbled into that kind of thing on YouTube, where they said, "Oh, we're just going to stream it to Facebook Live," for example, and Facebook Live would shut you down because their AI algorithm in the background would detect the song and say, "Well, you're not AC/DC, so we're shutting you down." Kind of thing.
And it's not like events weren't stressful before that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how do you see the role and execution of sponsorships evolving in the future of events, especially if we're going into sort of more public viewing and broadcast?
What a great question. I've been doing this stuff for 30 odd years. And one of the things I'd say is it's really difficult to get a sponsor to understand, because a sponsor is not just this blob. There are multiple stakeholders in the sponsor who might say they've got this as their objective, but truth be told, they'll have multiple objectives, and their sight on those objectives will all be different. And I think it's really difficult to get sponsors to understand, one, what exactly it is they're paying for, and directly linked to that, why that's valuable to them. So I often find we're having conversations with sponsors who are fixating on something, whatever it might be. I don't, because it will be different for every sponsor. They're fixating on something like where their logo appears, how often they're on stage, whether their award is longer than the others, or whether their award is first or middle or last in the program. And actually what they really ought to be worried about is, are they touching the audience they want to touch in the right way? Like, I think you could find much more creative, better solutions if you agreed what the objective was really finely, rather than how that objective was going to manifest itself in collateral and presence. Have I made sense there?
Yeah, going away from like an inventory, like a sponsorship inventory sales strategy, and going more into a sponsor integration strategy.
Yeah, so for instance, on the World Sport Photography Awards, there are a number of KPIs around diversity or geography that the sponsor wants to see. Are you growing in these territories? Are you engaging these communities? You wouldn't, and the measure of success is, yes, we did or didn't, but you wouldn't, as someone who's seeing World Sport Photography Awards content, know that was a KPI. You'd just be enjoying the content. And there's a whole bunch of content. So every post on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn is tagged to the sponsor, and that sponsor is phenomenal. Their social media team engages positively with every one of those. So that's very visible. Oh, they sponsored their names on everything. But there's a whole raft of KPIs that are about the emotion and touch points of the event that you would never see, and are there because we've worked hard to build that relationship with them.
Yeah, I love that that particular objective of like really like how well known or vested are you in this community, and how do we tailor something specific to get you the objective, which is to be introduced to this community in whatever light you're trying to do, rather than, as we said, a sponsorship inventory, which is the logo in that top left corner. So,
well, and it's really interesting. With that sponsor's been a great conversation, because you'd think the obvious way, if let's just take the diversity issue. Let's say, would like you to be more diverse. Well, the first thing that anyone says, let's have an award for diversity, and let's have a female photographer award, or an LGBTQ plus award, whatever it is, right? And we just said, that's not, no. The answer is, you tell us that's our objective. We make that happen, but we're not creating that. We're not being crass about it. It's going to happen because we're going to tinker behind the scenes. We're going to engage those communities in a very meaningful way, not a blunt way. And the results are better as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, what trends do you see sort of shaping the future of event production and communication? And how do you balance that innovation with traditional event production?
Wow. I mean, the cameras are going to get better. The cameras are going to get better. The mic's going to get better. And that means that the physical elements of staging we used to create have to match that. But the trend, I think, whatever we're seeing at events like the Super Bowl or the Victoria's Secrets party or the Oscars, whatever's happening there at those events, they will start to feel to every audience as if they're the kind of things that should happen anyway, and then we'll strive to get to them. Does that make sense? I think, or even just a TV show that's got a live audience. So, America's Got Talent or whatever. In the UK, Gladiators has come back. I think we'll start to expect that level of production and that manner of storytelling. So I think let's take Strictly Come Dancing, for instance, really interesting because a lot of that content's not the show, it's the behind the scenes. I mean, it's an awards campaign, right? But that wasn't my point. It's a TV show that lots of people watch, but that sharing of the narrative behind the scenes is part of why it works. And I think we'll start to see some of that in B2B events and in the production of them.
Yeah, I love that concept of that behind the scenes look that, we see in reality shows on television that, yes, we're going like the dance competitions. Yes, there's probably 20 minutes of presentational content in this whole hour, but we took a whole week of their journey to get there. And we distilled that through clever editing and sometimes some overproduced stuff to get you engaged in the story. So by the time they do that 5-second or 2-minute presentational dance, you're invested in that. And that kind of storytelling coming into the world of B2B events, I think that's what gets you to that, as we said at the beginning of the episode, how do we create Game of Thrones for the Concrete Producers Association of America?
Right. Well, imagine that so let's not talk about awards. Let's talk about like a classic trade show setup. Let's talk about CES. Imagine the content that was being produced in the build up to CES for Apple and Philips and Sony was their behind the scenes content. And then it would all be highly edited. You still wouldn't see the reveal of the product, but you'd see people talking about the product and how they were planning it and how they were working with you on the stage show and how that process went. So I think you could take that model and put it into the B2B world. And then the attendee, the visitor to that experience, I really want to go and see that because I love the Philips team. Weren't they awesome? Wasn't it fun when we watched when Apple were debating what the booths should look like? Wasn't that awesome? I'd love to go and see it. Imagine that kind of the use of that journey to engage the attendee. I think that'd be phenomenal, right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Simon, for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Oh, I'm all over LinkedIn. So just for Simon Burton, and you'll find me on LinkedIn. Very happy to connect and chat with people. Thanks for having me, Matthew.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.